I'll read a second time. Mr. Christy Souza.
Sir, we have an exceptional anti-narcotics force in the form of the Central Narcotics Bureau. CNB officers working with the wider home team risk life and limb to deter the trafficking and consumption of drugs in Singapore. It is only right that anti-drug laws are amended and updated to give the team of officers needed powers and tools to deter and fight against pro-drug activity in Singapore. Therefore, significant amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act being debated today are timely, useful, and relevant. Compared to many jurisdictions around the world, it can be said that Singapore does have the upper hand in the fight against drugs. But there is no reason why we should not continue making that upper hand more robust, more strong. We can do this by training our focus and resources on the threats at hand. In 2017, 4 out of 10 total drug abusers were below 30 years old. Also, 40% of total drug abusers were new drug abusers. Of those, about 2/3 were below the age of 30. These are the kind of proportions we have been looking at year on year since 2015. As the use of drugs leaves an indelible mark on the life of a person, the proportion of new drug abusers is particularly concerning. What is also of concern is the increasing number of youths who take on a drug-tolerant attitude towards drugs. According to the National Council Against Drug Abuse's Youth and Public Perception Survey, the proportion of youths aged 16 to 21 who agreed with statements such as, I quote, "I do not mind trying drugs when I'm overseas," unquote, and, quote, "I would try taking drugs if it was not illegal," unquote, rose from 11% in 2013 to 16% in 2016. This attitude towards drugs was more prevalent in older youth segments, that is, NSFs, university students and young working adults, than in younger youth groups, that is, those from secondary school, junior college, polytechnics, ITEs, and out-of-school youths. Over 33% of youths up to 30 years old misperceived cannabis as less harmful or non-addictive. One suggestion I have, in addition to the amendments proposed today, is that we include clear and informative learning material in our MOE science syllabus, which should detail the host of ills and harmful effects of experimenting with drugs. Make it examinable material. We need to start young and reinforce it regularly by putting it in the primary and secondary school syllabus. For university students, students traveling to places where drugs are more accessible, pre-exchange briefings, for example, could be arranged to remind them that drugs are not just illegal, but also harmful. To supplement drug prevention education efforts, this bill introduces new offences in new sections 11C and 11D to prohibit introducing a drug trafficker to another person or instructing a person to cultivate plants from which cannabis can be extracted, manufacturing or consuming drugs. Even as this offence provides tools to clamp down on contaminative actions and contain the spread of drug abuse, we cannot let this lull us into a sense of comfort. We still need to continue to be vigilant in equipping people with the skills to, 1, find credible sources of information, and 2, guard against the rhetoric used by the pro-drug camp. There are also other offences introduced by this bill that seek to limit exposure and contaminative acts. New section 11B introduces a new offence to protect our children against the harms of drug abuse. This is to be welcomed. In particular, it requires a person who possesses drugs or drug paraphernalia not to leave them lying around where a child may unknowingly take it. This is a crucial amendment. Why do I say this? In April 2017, in Utah, a girl was born a drug addict, her mother had used drugs heavily during her pregnancy. But lest we think that this can only happen in Utah, here are some stories from newspapers that let us catch a small glimpse of how children are impacted by their parents' drug abuse in Singapore. 1. In February 2018, a 1-year-old boy was rescued from suspected drug traffickers after his caregiver let him in their care. When his mother was found later, she was 4 months pregnant and had tested positive for drugs. 2. In June 2018, a 4-year-old girl was discovered with her mother within the reach of sachets of methamphetamine. 3. In August 2018, a 3-month-old girl was found in a unit with a suspected drug trafficker and drug abuser, with preliminary investigations showing that ice was abused during pregnancy and after the child was born. These are real-life stories of how drugs ruined lives, including that of innocent children. Therefore, this new offence is important to protect children from harmful exposure to drugs. Singapore must continue to take a firm and tough stance against drugs and questionable pro-drug narratives. While these amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act will put another tool in the legal toolbox for grappling with contamination and exposure to drugs, I would suggest that the medium of the Internet should be given special consideration. This is because the Internet poses unique concerns. The Internet makes it easier to commit an offence, and there is a greater potential for harm. This is especially true when it comes to buying drugs online, where the convenience and relative ease of accessing the dark net in the comfort of one's own home makes it little more than a click away. Therefore, to counterbalance these factors, which make drug trafficking over the Internet easier, lucrative, and also more harmful, we should have targeted offences or aggravated offences if the medium of the Internet is used. Additionally, with the increase in online purchases, we need to make sure that our capacity to detect drugs in parcels will be able to match the volume being sent and received domestically and internationally. Another suggestion is that the Misuse of Drugs Act gives due consideration to the potential harmfulness of the drug when mixed or cocktailed with available consumables. We should not just be concerned about the weight of the illicit drug. This is because using such contaminants or mixers could make the cocktail drug more addictive, more harmful. Related to this issue, there is a rapid proliferation in number, type, and availability of new psychoactive substances worldwide. We need to ensure that they are reclassified quickly into a first scheduled drug so that charges for trafficking, manufacture, import, export, possession, or consumption can be made. Could the Minister consider this? This will help reduce the demand for and supply of such drugs, that is, through deterrence. Besides preventing the spread of drug abuse and a drug-tolerant culture, it is important to step up rehabilitation efforts. I support these key and important steps of promoting rehabilitation of drug addicts. This bill seeks to support rehabilitation efforts in a few ways and build on the ongoing excellent work of the prisons officers, counselling staff, and VWOs and NGOs who put in tireless effort in the area of rehabilitation. Firstly, Clause 19 empowers the Director to require the parent or guardian of a supervisee under 21 to attend any counselling session. This is good in that it goes further to try to ensure that low-risk youths in the non-residential Youth Enhanced Supervision Scheme are given the best shot at rehabilitation. This amendment also recognizes the importance of family in rehabilitation, because family can play an important role in providing not just practical support, but also moral encouragement and purpose in life. I hope that older drug abusers would also be given opportunities to engage their families, such as to help drug abusers reconcile with their families, who could be their pillars of support upon release. Would the Ministry consider the possibility of having more open visits, such as that reported by the Straits Times during the Children's Day in 2017, for suitable cases, especially for inmates with young children? Secondly, Clause 18 increases the length of time for rehabilitation and supervision. Instead of 6 months, there will be a minimum of 12 months rehabilitation. The maximum duration has also been increased from 3 years to 4 years for rehabilitation and from 2 years to 5 years for supervision. This increases the amount of time that our captains of lives have to work with drug addicts to rehabilitate and decrease recidivism. This is excellent, as there is greater support and accountability for a longer time during the integration phase. With this longer supervision period, it is also important that supervision is not too disruptive so that the ex-offender's studies or employment will not be too affected. With the possibility of hair tests, how often does an ex-offender need to report for testing? For long-term resilience, could the Ministry consider providing some opportunities for physical activity or games so that former or recovering drug addicts can experience that there can be meaning to life and relief without drugs? Besides increasing the time of the supervision order to decrease recidivism, would the Ministry consider giving a workbook for the ex-offenders to record and review what they have learned in therapy sessions in relation to staying off drugs? For example, how they themselves can better cope with stress, or how to replace drug cravings with sport. This would provide them with a resource that they can have on hand whenever they may need to refer to it, so as to assist in quashing the urge to take drugs. Also, because this bill allows a supervision order to extend up to 5 years, it would be useful if the recidivism rate is tracked at the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year and 5 year marks. Would this be considered? Currently, under Section 34, the Director may require any person whom he reasonably suspects to be a drug addict to be medically examined or observed by a government medical officer or medical practitioner. This bill extends the power to committing the person to a place specified by the Director for up to 7 days. Could the Minister please expand on the purpose behind this amendment and why 7 days was chosen? Thirdly, there seems to be greater differentiation between drug abusers as a result of this bill's amendments. This is to be welcomed. At paragraph 19 of MHA's press release relating to this bill, it reads, and I quote, "However, drug abusers who commit other criminal offences and harm society will continue to be dealt with very strictly. They will be charged in court and be liable for imprisonment and caning, including LT," unquote. Is this differentiation between those who commit other offences and those who do not the reason why Clause 16 introduces a tiered minimum punishment for consumption and possession offences? Let us be clear that these amendments do not mean that Singapore's stance against drugs has softened. We are still treating drug abuse as a clear menace which needs to be eradicated, not tolerated. In fact, if we look at the bill closely, the changes are actually mixed in strategy but single in purpose. We want a drug-free Singapore. Clause 13 allows random spot checks to ensure that ex-addicts stay off drugs while long-term imprisonment is still on the books. Clause 16 introduces minimum punishment for those charged and convicted for consumption or possession offences, even though it is their first time. So what is clear is that while some amendments are rehabilitation-focused, the law does not hesitate to be harsh when it needs to be. Sir, as we step up rehabilitation efforts, we cannot lose sight of the reason why Singapore is so hard on drugs in the first place. Drug abuse itself is harmful. By consuming drugs, a drug user is harming himself or herself, his or her family, his or her community, and society. Even cannabis, which has been legalized in some countries, is harmful. Even though patients try to minimize the consequences of cannabis, treatment providers say that many report feeling isolated, paranoid, and are unable to effectively interact with the outside world and experience psychosis and hallucinations. In Colorado Springs, marijuana has even been called the, and I quote, gateway drug to homicide, unquote, by a district attorney. In 2016, 8 of 22 homicides had a marijuana nexus, unquote. And I quote again, in most cases, robbery of marijuana was a motive for the victim was killed during, or the victim was killed during a marijuana narcotics transaction, unquote. Homelessness had also increased by 50% since marijuana was legalized. The impact is so great that there has been much local response to the harm marijuana is causing. Out of 64 counties in Colorado, 61% have prohibited or have a moratorium on recreational marijuana, and out of the 243 municipalities that have taken action on this issue, about 69% have prohibited it. In Netherlands, The Hague has become the first Dutch city to outlaw smoking cannabis in around its city centre, central railway station, and major shopping areas. So why do we want a drug-free Singapore? Not a drug-reduced Singapore, not a drug-tolerant Singapore, but a drug-free Singapore. Why? Because drugs are harmful. No insidious pro-drug camp should deter us from our view that drugs are indeed harmful. Harmful to the abuser, to families, to society, and to a country's human potential. Indeed, Minister Shanmugam has taken this clear line on the international stage, and I support it. Last year, Canada legalized recreational marijuana. I do not agree with questionable groups who push pro-drug rhetoric. Singapore is on the right path in its tough stance against drugs. We must continually be on our guard, never taking a defeatist attitude. We have to look at threats beyond our shores in order to guard our shores. Regionally, there has been a surge of synthetic drug manufacturing in the Golden Triangle, especially for methamphetamine. There has also been international concern that the drug gangs there will diversify into other kinds of synthetic drugs, such as ketamine and fentanyl, highly addictive, highly destructive. Sir, in conclusion, our resolve to fight against drugs in Singapore will not be diluted. Rather, with legal amendments such as these, the resolve is made even more steely. As this bill adds steel to Singapore's determination to deter a potential drug menace, I support it.